All right, let's jump into this with CBS News senior political editor Steve Chaggaris and CBSN political contributor and former senior communications director for the Mike Huckabee campaign, Hogan Gidley. Before we get into what happened last night and what we can expect to hear tonight, Steve, Hogan, I got to ask you about these comments that Speaker Gingrich made on CTM. Because last night, Mike Pence, the vice presidential pick, said Trump would, quote, stand with our allies. And then this New York Times article comes out, and it counters that. Party unity aside, I mean, how are you going to unify the ticket? This is one of the bedrock principles of the Republican Party.
Okay, so I'm just going at it from somebody who's looking at this and saying we probably shouldn't take what Donald Trump is saying on these issues 100% literally, mainly because just from watching him, I'm not sure he's totally 100% versed in these issues. I think he is shorthanding whatever briefings he's getting on this stuff. And I think if you listen to what Gingrich says, Gingrich really gets into the nuance of how we want to deal with NATO moving forward. It's a discussion that we should have about potentially rejiggering the agreement, right? That's different than the shorthand, which is, oh yeah, you know, we're not necessarily going to stand.
We're not going to make a move if Russia does something.
I think Trump has the basic idea of what Gingrich is saying, but Gingrich's details, and I don't think what Gingrich says is in complete. I don't think it's completely opposite of what Mike Pence is saying. So my point is this: I really think what's going on here is Trump's going to have to bone up on these issues. If he's going to sit down with the New York Times and be asked specific questions about foreign policy, he's got to have his answers straight, because what's going to wind up happening is then you're going to have Mike Pence have to answer questions about it, more detailed questions about it. You have to Newt Gingrich talk about it. And where is Donald Trump going to be when we get to the debates and a moderator asks him a question about NATO and he shorthands it in a way that sounds like it's against what his running mate and his advisors are telling him, but really in essence what it is it's just a shorthanded, maybe not as nuanced answer that he should be delivering. And so I think he's really got to get schooled on the details of all these issues.
And Hogan, does this not feed in then to the Clinton campaign narrative that Donald Trump is not qualified? He doesn't have an understanding of the issues. Let's move away from domestic policies, talking about the foreign policy expertise that he needs to be the commander-in-chief.
Right. Well, let's just also note that a new poll came out showing a majority of Americans are kind of clamoring for more specifics on a lot of these issues. So I do think he has somewhat of a hill to climb on that, because this campaign's been short on some specificity for sure. In this particular instance, though, I'm not as shell-shocked by it as Steve, only because, and I'm not a policy expert either, but this would kind of flow into the themes he's been talking about this entire campaign about putting America first. Right. Now, the ramifications of that are enormous, and I don't know that he clearly grasps the ramifications of some of these comments, but I think a lot of Americans aren't going to be too worried if he says, look, I'm going to look at all these deals because this thing was 40 years ago, so I'm not sure if America's best interest is being served, at least at the level we are now, bleeding money, helping these countries, because, yeah, you're going to help allies, but your first priority should be this country, what he's basically saying. So I understand that the ramification is huge, especially when you're dealing with international affairs, that Donald Trump clearly hasn't had a handle on this entire campaign. Gingrich is a master at it, right, but it still falls into the broad general themes of the campaign.
I mean, let's remember what George Bush did when he ran for president in 2000. He was no expert on a lot of this stuff, and he was not shy about that, and that's fine. And, you know, he said, I'm going to surround myself with people who understand this stuff, with good people who understand this stuff. And I think that's what Trump is trying to do, but he can't get himself into a situation where when he's asked these questions, he steps in it into a point where the experts on these issues then come back and say, what are you talking about? So he's got to figure out that way, the way to answer these questions, sort of like George W. Bush did, in keeping your theme going of making America great again, America first, but also not getting into trouble on the policy.
Well, and that's, I think, the question, because he is proving himself to be an America first candidate, and there have been candidates like that throughout American history. The question, though, is does he have an understanding of what it means to be America first 20 years from now? Because what he's talking about with this NATO alliance thing, and we don't have to get into the specifics, could have potential ramifications, not in 2 years or 3 years, but in 5, 10, 15 years.
But that's something the voters are going to have to decide, right? This is a debate that's going to be going on. It's going to be a completely different debate than, or a side of the issue than what Hillary Clinton is going to be pushing for, right? That's a debate that the voters are going to have to look at and say, is this the way we want our country to be in 20 years? Do we want NATO to be gone or rejiggered, or do we want it to stay the same? That's something that the voters are going to have to make their minds up on. The question is this: do voters want in their president a policy wonk like Hillary Clinton, or do they want somebody who they see as just out there as a CEO of the government and looking for what he says are America's interests first?
And that's
going to be the easier debate for people to digest, and that's ultimately what it's going to come down to.
Right, I think it's a little bit different than that. It's not necessarily do they want a policy wonk, which Hillary is, which I think is a valid point. It's not that Trump is a CEO type. What they want is someone who looks out for them, who they feel looks out for them. Now, if they get that sense from a policy wonk like Hillary, they'll go with her.
Right.
If they get that sense from someone like Donald Trump, they'll go with him.
Very good point.
But the issue is with this whole NATO deal, look, he can easily just say, I think we absolutely have to protect our allies. We have to keep our commitments. But I'm not going to do it at the expense of you.
All right.
I'm going to put our allies first, but not before America. America comes before them.
And, Steve, as you point out, that's what Americans, at least the people that support Donald Trump, say they like in him. They like that he sees everything through, and I don't want to quote his book, but through the art of the deal, which is like, I make deals, and if this is a bad deal, if Germany's not pulling their weight, it's a bad deal, I'm going to fix it.
But that's what he does in real estate. He comes in and goes, well, I'm buying this company, I'm buying this piece of real estate because it was a bad deal, so I'm getting it on the cheap, and I'm going to make it better.
All right, let's move on because I want to talk. We have a whole bunch more stuff to talk about. Hogan, I want to ask you specifically, last night, Ted Cruz, your former boss, Mike Huckabee, had a really interesting analogy on Fox this morning. He said that we all thought Ted Cruz was going to circle the airport, meaning he was going to come on board and ultimately endorse Donald Trump, but he absolutely crashed the plane into the runway. And he said he's essentially earned the nickname that Donald Trump gave him on the campaign trail, Lying Ted. What do you think?
Well, look, I got an email from the governor last night immediately following Ted Cruz's speech. In fact, Newt Gingrich wasn't even finished. And I got an email from the governor that he had started writing and it sent to me. And by the time Eric Trump had begun his speech, I was reading through it. And what's fascinating is I heard the sot from Ted Cruz about this pledge and how it doesn't, my wife was attacked.
When you attack his wife,
I went back and pulled up the actual piece of paper because we signed it for Huckabee signed it, but I had to get it scanned. I looked at the bottom. Front and back, I didn't see an asterisk that said this is null and void if the campaign gets nastier, if your wife is attacked. And let's not forget, Ted Cruz's hands aren't clean here. He also attacked Melania Trump, okay? He attacked personally to Donald Trump as well. And since then, Donald Trump
said on Stephen Colbert that he wouldn't, if he saw Trump in the rearview mirror, I wouldn't know if I put my foot on the gas or on the brake.
Absolutely. And Trump,
and
Trump
it got nasty on all sides.
Exactly.
And Trump even said, what about Ted Cruz? He goes, nice guy. We like Ted Cruz, right? Even he's changed and understood, we're done with the fight now.
Yeah. He invited all of his rivals to speak here. Some declined,
even the ones that didn't endorse him and weren't going to endorse him, it was like it was just historical to have somebody up on that stage that you really was a loose cannon. But look, let's for just a quick second. Ted Cruz was in the catbird seat. He had to come speak because he finished second. They were going to give him the prime time slot to come speak. The question was Ted Cruz going to act as the statesman or the spoiler?
Yeah.
And then the ego takes over, the self-centeredness takes over, the ambition takes over, and he decides he's going to make it about him. And when he used the line conscience, remember, choose your conscience, that was his line on the campaign trail that basically said, look, because of who I am and because of your conscience, I'm the right guy.
Steve, principled stand or self-serving and classless?
I think it depends on who you ask, right? I mean, the thing about what Cruz did, though, I think he totally misunderstood the room. I think he thought there was more support for him and his principled stand in the room.
There was up until a certain moment, right?
Right.
Well, right. But his principled stand also included not backing Donald Trump. And I'm not saying he needed to go out there and full-throated endorsement and say, I am going to vote for Donald Trump.
He didn't have to go Christie.
All you have to say is vote Republican.
Yeah.
Right.
Vote Republican ticket.
Yeah.
Just leave it at that.
Yeah, leave it at that.
I support the nominee.
I support the
Marco Rubio
not even
gave.
that.
You don't even have to say his name.
You don't even have to say his name. On to victory for the Republican ticket.
Right.
How about that? That's as vague as you can get.
Because a lot of people are saying Rubio did it the right way.
Right. That is the most tepid way you could do it. You can still do it and walk away, and everybody's like, okay, well, at least he didn't try to undermine the nominee.
Right.
But that was dog whistle language.
You watch the Texas delegation remarks from Cruz today, and we played the soundbite of him talking about the attacks. Well, he didn't actually reach into that bag until about a half an hour after he realized he started losing the Texas delegation. There were people in that delegation who were getting up and saying, I love you, Ted Cruz. I will lie on railroad tracks for you. Yet I don't understand why you did what you did last night in terms of not pushing for the Republican ticket. And that, to me, I thought was really interesting. Texas was his strongest delegation. It's his state.
Yeah.
He did that was the biggest victory that he had in terms of primaries. And these people are his people. For them to say that, we love you, Ted Cruz, but what the heck were you doing?
Right.
That, to me, was extremely telling.
And it's also very telling, before we wrap this up, that you pointed out, Steve, that Senator Cruz came in here. He had some delegates here. He had some votes. But this is, as a lot of people are saying, a movement. And he got the second highest number of votes, and he wasn't able to close this room.
But not the second highest number of votes enough to close to close the room. I mean, you look back in '76 when Reagan and Ford were going at it. It was half and half.
Sure.
I mean, Ford barely beat him in terms of number of delegates. This is way different. I mean, this is 1,725 delegates for Trump and about 500-something for Cruz. It's not even close. And so, yeah, you may have support in the room, but you don't have overwhelming support in the room. And I think you have to nod to the guy who did get 1,725 delegates.
Sounds like you mean classless.
He didn't.
I didn't say that.
He didn't
kidding.
nod. He gave him the finger. I mean, it was a full-out revolt in essence, in the language he used, and that was what was so fascinating to me, was the dog whistle language. And that's when the room started to turn. When he used the "vote your conscience" line, I saw it coming, and I thought, no one's going to remember that's what he used to say on the campaign trail about "vote for me," really.
Yeah, right.
Because if you really think about this, if you listen to your conscience, what's funny is the conscience line. Wouldn't your conscience say to support the pledge that you yourself signed?
Well, and some people read that "vote your conscience" as, well, maybe he's saying you could vote for Hillary Clinton.
Absolutely.
All right. Wow. Okay. And that was actually the moment Donald Trump chose to come into the room, wowing the crowd. Steve Chaggaris and Hogan Gidley, we thank you as always. Brilliant analysis. Appreciate it.